We're going to talk about Donald Trump, although in some cases not talk about Donald Trump, because you, although you are a psychologist, you are prohibited by the rules of your profession from diagnosing. What's the actual rule from diagnosing anyone without talking to them or something? What is it?
Right. Just to be clear, I'm actually a pastoral counselor and a licensed clinical professional counselor, not a psychologist per se.
Okay.
But the ethics for all of the therapeutic professions are that you don't diagnose someone or publicly give them a diagnosis without having actually treated them or done an evaluation. So since I've never met the man, I would not be able to give a diagnosis of him.
So if Donald Trump wants us to talk about him, he will have to make an appointment with you.
That's correct.
And at the moment, he's busy.
Yeah, I'm not expecting that anytime soon.
Some people think he'll have more free time. I'm not so sure after the election. We'll see. But in any event, so we're gonna talk about aspects of his psychology that have been conjectured or asserted in various corners, certainly including a very, very prominent kind of remote diagnosis of narcissism. There was a whole Atlantic piece some months ago that did that. We'll talk about what narcissism is and so on. If we have time, I may talk to you about the other aspect of your professional ID, which is that you are an ordained minister. And maybe we'll talk about Trump from that perspective. I had your colleague, John Tatamano, on some time ago talking about Trump. Tried to get him to muster some Christian charity for Trump. I would say I had limited, or at least incomplete success.
Okay.
And actually in Trump's followers as well. Maybe I had more success on that front. Anyway, so talk a little about, well, whatever you want to talk about. Now, if we're talking about narcissism, that's an actual pathology in what's the official text? The DSM? You have it there?
Right. Here it is.
There it is, folks. The Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, 5th edition. And narcissistic personality disorder is in there.
Yes.
And what, again, you are not, it will not be your job today to say which of these things might or might not apply to Trump. I may be able to play a role there since I have no constraints on what I say. But why don't you just tell us, for starters, what is this narcissism thing?
Sure. Well, there are many ways of understanding it, but the official diagnostic manual lists things in terms of traits or diagnostic criteria. And so there are actually 9 of those that are listed. And a personality disorder, just to back up and say this first, a personality disorder is not the same thing as, say, a mental illness on the level of schizophrenia or major clinical depression. It used to actually, in the previous DSM, be put on a different axis altogether. What it is an enduring set of personality traits that could bring someone in for treatment. Often with the personality disorders, people come in grudgingly for treatment because someone else has said, you go get therapy or I'm leaving you.
I see.
So whereas most other disorders are troubling to the person, him or herself,
I see.
These disorders that tend to be most troubling to people around the person.
So you don't hear people come in and say, I'm cripplingly disabled by my narcissism.
It's never happened yet.
Okay.
To me.
And I doubt Donald Trump has ever walked in and said that to anyone.
Well, and honestly, the people who have, what casually or not so casually said, do you think I'm narcissistic, and they're agonizing about it and they're feeling very anxious, that generally is a sign that they are not. Mm-hmm. So let me run down these traits, because that would kind of give us a benchmark of what's considered to be the criteria for what would invoke an actual diagnosis. Mm. So the overall description here is a pervasive pattern of grandiosity in fantasy or behavior, need for admiration, and lack of empathy, beginning by early adulthood and present in a variety of contexts, as indicated by 5 or more of the following.
Whoa. Can I just interject one thing here? It's interesting with these things and pathologies in general, in asking how many of them are just slightly amped up parts of normal human nature, right? Like in the New York Times, you may have seen this piece a couple of days ago, said a study of these Trump tapes reveals that he has been driven by a fear of losing status. Well, welcome to the club. I think that describes everyone, so far as I know, driven partly by a fear of losing status. The grandiosity, I mean, we're all delusionally self-centered, right? Or not?
That's more of a question for philosophy,
okay.
right?
Okay, then I'll let you proceed.
Or maybe it would be St. Augustine, that we are all, or Martin Luther, we are all curved in on ourselves. And so we can go to the theology. I see it on a spectrum of behaviors and attitudes, and we could come back to that.
Okay.
But do you want to hear?
Sure. What are the 5? So this is
the menu out of which you need 5 to be diagnosed.
Oh, you need 5 of these.
5 of these 9, at least.
And if I have 5 of these 9, am I a narcissist?
Yeah.
Okay, because I'm interested in doing both me and Trump. Maybe I'll keep score separately. Trump, I'll have a Trump column and a me column.
All right, that sounds good. That sounds good.
Let's go.
Okay, so number 1, has a grandiose sense of self-importance. For example, exaggerates achievements and talents, expects to be recognized as superior without commensurate achievement. So that's a little different than someone who has realistic self-confidence.
Right. So I'm giving Trump a yes on that. I don't think I'm going out on a limb here. I'm not so sure. I don't think I necessarily get a yes there. So far, I'm good. Okay. What's next?
We're 1 for 1 then. 2 is preoccupied with fantasies of unlimited success, power, brilliance, beauty, or ideal love.
Unlimited is a pretty strong word.
Yeah.
And there, I almost think we don't know enough about what goes inside his head. I mean, for example, there's been conjecture that when he got into the presidential race, he had no intention of actually winning, and he just thought if he could get 15% in the primaries, it would help his brand and prominence. I'm not going to necessarily, unlimited, such a strong word. I'm not going to give him a check mark there.
Well, it's the key words here too are preoccupied with fantasies of.
Yeah,
so
again,
to imagine yourself as President of the United States probably goes beyond what most people realistically would imagine unless they had been in politics for a long time and had been working up the ladder.
Yeah, although many people, although it turned out not to be unrealistic. I mean, he's the Republican candidate. And also don't many people have, after their morning coffee, occasionally have fantasies that are not realistic? Don't we all have a little Walter Mitty in us?
Well, this is preoccupied with fantasies.
I'm not going to give him. I'm not
arguing for Trump. Yeah. I'm just saying.
Okay. No, he's 1 for 2.
Beyond normal confidence, let us just say.
I'll put a question mark there, but I think 1 for 2. Maybe we'll revisit that. What's next?
Okay, fine. I'm not arguing for a diagnosis here. 3, believes that he or she is special and unique and can only be understood by or should associate with other special or high status people or institutions.
Behaviorally, you would certainly infer as much. I mean, again, we don't know what goes on in his head. We do know that he alone can solve it. And that's pretty unique. If you alone can solve it. And of course, you never know if a politician's just saying these things or believes them. I think I'm going to tentatively give him a check mark there. I think I'm going to tentatively give him a... Can you say that one more time?
Yeah, believes that he or she is special, and that's in quotation marks actually in the book, and unique, and can only be understood by or should associate with other people or high status people or institutions.
Well, I think, an issue we're going to face repeatedly is like with this, as we go down, this is probably, we'll see a lot of cases where his behavior would seem to suggest as much, but on the other hand, there is this question, is Trump in his own mind a pillar of self-confidence or a writhing mass of insecurity?
Well, we're going to get to that after we go through the list, because actually, when you were talking earlier with me about, is there a way to view him with a certain amount of Christian charity or spiritual generosity. I think you have to get underneath the why of these things. But these are behavioral observations that a clinician would make in order to make the diagnosis. It actually isn't necessarily what the person is feeling deep down inside when you take off the mask. So a lot of this is actually, with a narcissist in particular, we're talking about a persona. We're talking about how they are compulsively needing to present themselves to the world in order to feel good. And the self-esteem underneath, I mean, the way you describe that as a writhing mass of insecurity is actually what is going on for most narcissistic personalities.
Okay.
But it's mostly not conscious because they can't tolerate that anxiety and that sense of emptiness.
Okay.
So.
All right. So I will maybe be more liberal in my willingness to give him a check mark going forward.
All right. 4 is requires excessive admiration.
Well, you know what? Now, here's the funny thing. Is one thing I've said about him is he's an odd combination of desperately wanting attention and not necessarily insisting that the attention be favorable. I mean, it seems like he would rather people pay attention. He would rather 100 people pay attention to him than 20 pay attention to him and like him. He gives that sense, right, that he wants attention above all.
Yeah, but there's another dimension to this, and I'm just speaking now about the category itself. Requiring excessive admiration often goes with being extremely reactive to criticism, rejecting it, or always needing to have the externalization of responsibility. So I need to be admired, or I need to be right all the time. And if someone criticizes me, I have to deflect that by saying, no, it's they who are wrong, or it's somebody else's problem. I am fine.
Okay. Then I'll give him a yes with a question mark. But I do think there's a quote in that Atlantic piece where he says, I'll tell you, he's talking about whatever part of Florida he lives in. He says, I'm the king. I'll tell you, all these important people, they come and they eat. They eat at Mar-a-Lago or whatever it's called, and they say nice things to me, and they kiss my ass, and then they go home and they say that I'm a jerk, but I'm still the king, because they come and they say the nice things to his face. So this is, I don't know, that's a little. I'll give him a tentative yes. He's doing well. 2 for 4.
And that goes back to number 3, also needing to brag about associating with so-called important people.
Yeah, I gave him a yes there.
Yeah. So, okay, number 5 has a sense of entitlement. That is, unreasonable expectations of especially favorable treatment or automatic compliance with his or her expectations. So, will you accept the results of the election? Well, only if it's what I want.
Now, you're kind of coaching the witness at this point, I would say.
Okay.
I'm the witness. But yeah, we got to give him. I mean, you didn't have to add that for me to say, yeah, we're giving him a big check mark there. Well, he's already got 4. He's got 3 and a maybe, and he only needs 5.
Yeah, we're still on number 5 here. Also, and for an ordinary person too, there are plenty of ordinary narcissists out there who don't rise as high as Donald Trump in an election. A narcissistic trait of entitlement would be, I'm so important and I'm so busy, I shouldn't have to stand in line at the bank. Mm-hmm. So entitlement is really, I should get what I want because I'm me.
No, I've got to say, he very much exudes that sense.
Mm-hmm. But it's not unique to him.
Right, you wouldn't have to be running for president to be a narcissist, right?
Okay. Number 6 is interpersonally exploitive, i.e. takes advantage of others to achieve his or her own ends. We see this a lot with professionals who are involved with sexual misconduct, for example.
Just to take one example.
Well, it's an area that I've done a lot of work on.
Yeah.
And professional ethics. But you see this kind of exploitation in terms of objectification of other people because I deserve to be gratified now in the way that I want to be gratified, and so I'm just going to take it whether or not the other person is actually consenting to it.
Yeah, I mean, like the account of the woman who had been a contestant on The Apprentice, and it's consistent with the account of like the People magazine reporter, is obviously just totally consistent with that. And what's kind of interesting is how almost mechanical he was about it. The woman had come to him ostensibly for the person who had been on The Apprentice had come to him ostensibly for like a job interview, and he's kind of molesting her, you might say, in a room where they're alone, and she resists, and finally he ceases and desists, and then he's like, okay, let's have dinner, and like he goes through with that. And they order out, and he's, and then he doesn't give her the job that she had thought she was going to get in the end. But I think if we have time at the end, I'm going to ask you about sociopathy, because it always strikes me that people who do some of these, or just people who have a ton of like extramarital affairs and have it not intrude on their life. You just wonder, like, in other words, they can then compartmentalize and go about their business. Just shift to the next thing. Don't you almost have to have some sociopath in you to make such a graceful transition to the next part of your life without going, oh, I guess she hates me now, without that being a problem. So anyway, we'll put that on hold, the possibility.
I talked earlier about the idea that narcissism exists on a spectrum, and on the mild end, you would have the healthy. There is such a thing you could think of as healthy narcissism, which is kind of a little extra measure of bold self-confidence that many people have and need to have. I mean, I think anyone who runs for president needs to have a degree of healthy narcissism, because to go through what you need to go through to do that, it requires you to really believe in yourself as your cause on some level, or to believe that you are someone who carries an important cause.
Right.
But within moderation and within some scope of realism, that's not necessarily pathological. On the other end of the spectrum, on the worst end of the spectrum, or the most pathological, is in fact, in my view, sociopathy. That this sociopathy really is the extreme end of narcissism in my theoretical understanding. Now, you're not going to see that in the DSM. The DSM has other diagnostic markers for sociopathy, but there are similarities, and one of them is a profound absence of empathy for another person, plus the lack of remorse.
Yeah.
And you can't really have remorse if you don't have empathy.
Yeah, exactly. So that's very interesting.
Most of us who have any degree of kind of public success would exist somewhere on the healthy end of that spectrum, hopefully, but there are some wide variations. Okay, so the next diagnostic marker, in fact, number 7, is lacks empathy, is unwilling to recognize or identify with the feelings and needs of others.
Mm-hmm. Now, this is interesting because, of course, he is presenting himself to his followers as being one of the few politicians who really cares about their plight. But I just see, I think, nothing in his history to suggest that there's actually empathy there. I mean, we know he can be just incredibly mean to people when he sees their interests as opposed to his, but beyond that, I just don't see him ever having a Mother Teresa side. There was a quote in that aforementioned Times piece where they said he's driven by a lack of status. I thought the most interesting quote, these were tapes that a guy who was going to write a biography, or maybe did write it or something, or wrote a book about him, tapes the guy had gotten from interviewing Trump, but they had never been released before. And one of the things Trump said was, he said, who do you respect or something? Anyway, he said something like, yeah, I don't respect anybody, nobody's worth respect, or it's just like the average person out there is not worthy of respect or something. He just seems to take a dismal view of people not named Donald Trump.
Okay.
So I got to give him, and I think he's already. I think we can ring the bell at this point and declare him the winner, because we've got 5 yeses and a maybe, and it only takes 5, right, to be a narcissist.
You want to hear the last 2?
Sure. Let's see. I mean, let's okay. Go for the.
But what I was going to say about that last thing too, that's not in the DSM, but one of the ways in which a lack of empathy can show up is in a very charismatic narcissistic person, right? Not everybody who's narcissistic is boorish and rude. They may be arrogant, but they're not necessarily unlikable in every respect. Not all narcissists. And if manipulation is a quality, then some narcissists are extremely good at feigning empathy, but they don't actually feel it.
So you can be a charismatic, widely beloved, perhaps sociopathic narcissist.
You could be.
You could be.
I've noticed you've stopped checking off the boxes for yourself, Bob. Are you telling?
Well, I gotta say, I think in almost all these cases, his score is certainly higher than mine. Now, whether that was spoken like a true therapist, pointing that out about me, and it makes me want to lie down on a couch and explore my inner depths. But sadly, time does not permit. So let's move on to.
Okay. So number 8 is often envious of others or believes that others are envious of him or her.
Well, he would not admit to envy of others. I don't think very often. He would assume everyone is envious of him. Wait, so they're saying both of these things are what? Often envious of others, and now I suspect he often is stricken by envy. I mean, I suspect whenever he sees some guy with a woman he considers beautiful, he's like, "Wait, that should be me. Why isn't it?" That kind of thing, right?
Well, I think the way this would show up in a person would be that should be mine, or I should be in that position. I'm better than him.
Right.
So not being willing to see that other people might be more successful, so that would engender jealousy, but at the same time feeling like, well, of course, everyone's jealous of me because I'm so good.
I have a little of that first part of like envying other people and thinking, wait, I should be that person. But I digress. Let's get back to Trump.
And then the last one is 9. Shows.
Wait. I need to decide what I'm going to give him on 8. So I'm sure I would think it's a weird thing. I don't think he'd admit to envy. I think he would claim that others rightly envy him. I'm gonna put a question mark on that for now. We don't need
Well, it's a speculation. You don't have the evidence,
right,
for that. But
this is why we don't diagnose them unless we've actually
that's exactly right
interrogated them, right? Okay.
And then on number 9, shows arrogant, haughty behaviors or attitudes. That's a pretty broad.
I think most people would say yes. So, I mean, even if the question marks were no's, we would still have, by my scorekeeping, 6 of 9. He only needs 5, and so.
Well, and I'm not going to read it all to you, but then there's a whole descriptive couple of pages in the book that go further, and they say things like self-esteem is invariably very fragile, although they require excessive admiration. Need for constant attention and admiration.
That's totally him.
Expect their arrival to be greeted with great fanfare and are astonished if others do not covet their possessions. Fishing for compliments, often with great charm. So they give some more,
Well, most of that sounded like dead on.